Hello everybody, you're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. This is the weekly radio show where we chat about the local arts news. We have a different guest on each week. We head over to the Rhylight Zone for a short story and or some poetry. We catch up with Twangling Jack Ford over in the Oak Shed for a weekly album review. And we play local, unsigned and or independent music. As always, you can reach out to me here at the studio by dropping me an email on dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain@wickhamsound.org.uk. I'm particularly keen to hear from poets, performers, musicians, people with MP3s to share, people with local arts news. Don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. And we are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Please do leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. It all helps. So this week we are going to be chatting to author Regina Saint Claire, but before we do that, we're going to head over to the Rhylight Zone for a little bit more flash fiction from A.B. Frank.
The dimly lit library was adorned with shelves stacked high with dusty tomes and curiosities. A thick layer of cobwebs clung to the corners, hinting at concealed mysteries. Dr. Strauss's obsession with the occult had driven him to forsake the mundane world, plunging headlong into a forbidden realm of dark knowledge. A winter storm raged outside as Strauss sought a secret study room. He pushed and pulled at books and other items until the door, disguised as a bookcase, opened with an ominous creak. A blast of the winter chill blew the hem of his coat as he entered the study. Setting down his lamp, he scoured the spines of scores of books and found it. The ancient text, the product of a bygone era, was now in his possession. Driven by an insatiable desire for power, his eyes fixed upon the brittle pages. Something stirred high up in the rafters, shrouded in shadows. Strauss's excitement waned with the dawning realization that something else was in the room. He looked up, feeling an unnatural chill wrap around his spine. The thing he shared the room with descended, clinging to the stone wall. It defied gravity as it continued its way down the wall, head first. Strauss's lamp blinked out. The thing attacked him. He took his last breath before the echo of his scream faded. The secret study door creaked shut. Aside from the ongoing storm outside, the library was still once more. Heavy grey clouds bunched overhead. Rain poured into the city, unrelenting. But that didn't stop thousands of men from lining the streets for the first day of strike action. Their protests over pay drowned out the ongoing downpour. Caught in the thick of it was a mill owner who forced his chubby frame through the crowded thoroughfare. A glass shattering startled him, followed by the tinkle as it showered onto the ground. It could have been a window, it could have been a bottle. The thought of a broken bottle as a makeshift weapon filled him with renewed eagerness to escape the confines of the protesters. He angled his hat to hide his face. He was underpaying these men after all. It felt like an age before he left the organised chaos behind. His mill stood on the bank of the swelling river. He noticed the door was ajar. He entered the building, removed his overcoat and wiped the rain from his face. At the door to his office, he heard voices. "Surely not," he began. "Somebody's actually turned in for their shift." Inside were two men rifling through drawers and papers. "This database has my personal information, my staff details." "We know," replied a third man from behind him. "That's why we're here." "It's private." The third man pointed a revolver at waist height with nonchalance. "Nobody's coming to stop us. They're busy crying over wages." "Got it, boss." One of the men grinned, brandishing a piece of paper. "Let's go," said the man with the revolver. He turned to the mill owner. "Forget our faces." He winked and disappeared into the rainstorm.
That was some flash fiction by A.B. Frank. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Betty Accorsi with Ampolo.
I'm here, like a line in the sand, on dry land. Maybe I should be writing something to mean something to somebody, to me. But the words are like drip, drip, and somehow they don't wanna fit. There's a shift and it changes. I'm into different stages. Oh, I'm just sat here reflecting on my life, taking step by step. Sometimes I'm not walking or talking, lying on the carpet in a dreamlike state. Lying on the carpet in a dreamlike state. I'm just sat here reflecting my life, taking step by step. But sometimes I'm not even walking or talking, lying on the carpet in a dreamlike state. Is this my fate? To drift, to ebb and flow, to escape. Let us fall from the sky and land on me like snow. And all I can do is take it slow. All I can do is take it slow.
That was Dreamlike State by Joe Martin, and before that we had Ampolo by Betty Accorsi. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it is time for us to be joined by this week's guest, who is author Regina Saint Claire.
Well, the first question is one that I ask everybody, and it's what was the last book that you read, and what did you think of it?
Good question. Well, I'm currently reading a book called Lace. It's like an 80s trashy novel for Garb August, but that's not what you asked. The last one I read, I just finished Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock.
Cool. And how was it?
It's really good. And I'm rewatching the documentary series on Netflix that goes with it.
Perfect. And you mentioned Garb August. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yes, that's something hosted by a YouTuber named Criminali, and he's really great. I'm sure you're familiar with his channel. Mm-hmm. And he hosts, I think this is the second year in a row, a read-along, I guess it's called, Garb August, which is reading nothing but garbage books during the month of August. And I read a lot of garbage books anyway, so it was fun to pick some out. So he has a bunch of co-hosts, and I am reading, like I said, a trashy 80s big fat book. It's like 700 pages, so it might take me the entire month. And then I picked out a couple other, some of my favorite, usually books like campy. Well, Dean Koontz called them back in the 70s big sexy books. So that's what I'll call them.
Awesome. Well, and you mentioned YouTube, and obviously you're a YouTube content creator yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your YouTube channel and maybe define what BookTube is for us?
Oh, okay. Well, BookTube is a subset of YouTube, which is it's not a separate channel. You can it's just on. I don't know, what would you call it? Like, I guess a subset of YouTube.
This is like a community, I guess. Yeah.
A community. That's a good word. And it's for people like myself and you who love to read books and talk about books and get to know each other, mostly online. But I've had a few in-person meetups, which has really been fun. And I've been doing my channel Regina's Haunted Library for 5 years, which I can't believe it. And it's been a fun adventure. I probably have uploaded at least one video a week. I may have missed a couple weeks, but in those 5 years, so it's pretty good. And that we also interact, a lot of us, on Instagram or Vox, or sometimes. I was just chatting with Matt Wall.
Yeah.
You know Matt, don't you?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a fun community. It really is. And we talk about all kinds of things, but it always kind of circles back to books. Horror in particular is most of my what I focus on, but I also read other things like big sexy books, trashy books like that.
Cool. And you mentioned your haunted library. How would you describe your library to someone who hasn't watched one of your videos?
Well, my haunted library it's actually kind of, I mean, it is a real place where I keep my books, but it's actually like almost like a set, because I have a studio outside of my house where I do all my art projects, and I've hosted live music events there. And what I did when I decided to start a booktube channel was I took over half of my screening room and just started building up IKEA shelves in there, and hauled some old furniture and all my books over there. And I've just acquired a lot of books in the 5 years since I started. So my channel is kind of like a fun, I like to think of it almost like a horror host vibe, like an old-fashioned horror host. And I have my alter ego, Batilda, who's my sister slash, I don't know, 150-year-old vampire character who pops up every now and then. So I do sometimes do skits, and I try to keep everything lighthearted and fun as much as I can. And I also do talk about movies, but it's mostly horror.
Cool. Well, and you mentioned Batilda, and I wanted to ask about her. So doesn't she do horoscopes?
Yes, she does monthly horoscopes. So I've been doing that. It's not quite 5 years, but that's been kind of fun every month to pull that together. And one month I was a couple days late, and I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll skip it. And I got so many messages saying, where are the horoscopes? Where's Batilda's horoscope? So I do have about 100 people who watch that every month. Yeah. So that's kind of fun.
That's amazing. Cool.
Yeah.
So obviously one of the things I want to chat to you about as well is your writing. So could you tell us a little bit about how long you've been writing?
Well, I published all self-published over 20 books, including 3 anthologies that I've done, and you've been involved in some of those. And I may have have you done all 3? I can't even remember.
I think 2 of the 3 I think I've done.
Yes, you have been part of it, and that has been a great experience, and that was all for charity. And then I published my own work, which is mostly horror, some young adult paranormal romance. I have 2 series, and then a couple other like standalone gothic horror. I have a new book that's coming out. I'm working on it now. It should be out. I keep saying September. I said August, now September. It may be out in October. It's definitely coming out. It'll the October at the latest.
Yeah.
So I've been working on that, and I put out a bunch of books not 2 years ago during like COVID, and I wrote a lot, and I just published a lot, and then now my last book came out a year ago. So I think I might try to. I've written a lot, but I haven't published in a year, so I got to kind of get that going again. But I'm excited to get. I'm due, and I'm excited to get the new book out, and it's always fun to clear the deck and start something new.
Yeah, and you mentioned the anthology, so could you tell us a little bit more, maybe about each one of them, as well as you mentioned that they're in aid of charity. So what charity you support?
The charity is called First Book, and it's an international charity that supplies books and educational materials to kids in need. So that's cool. And I think we've donated, it's probably close to $1,000 at this point. I have to check, but yeah, which is great. And so the first one was called Local Haunts, and that was authors from all over the world, all English language, but it was, it was cool to have so many authors from different places writing about haunt, or a story inspired by a haunted place near where they live or where they're from. And then the second one was a winter themed anthology called Served Cold. And then the last one was Lurking in the Dark, which came out, I think, 2 years ago. And that was a monster theme. So those are the three. I may do it again. I've been busy doing publishing a zine, a horror zine.
Yeah.
That's all. It's called Bookworms Zine, and you can buy it on Etsy. It's non-digital. So I kind of got off the grid a little bit with that project, and that kind of took the place of those anthologies. But there have been some booktubers that have contributed to that. And the new one, I have 2 out, and there's a new one coming out in around Halloween.
Cool. And so I wanted to ask you about the anthologies, because they have some pretty distinctive cover art. So how did the cover art come about for them?
The cover art is done by Cameron Rubik, who is also an author. He does like mostly slasher stories. He has a new one out. It's a two-part called Frankie Graves. That's really good. I read the first one. In fact, I reviewed it in the last zine, and then I still have yet to read the follow-up. But he's really cool. He's in Colorado. I met him probably through Cameron Chaney, who's a popular horror tuber, I call him. And it's funny because one of my good friends brought his kid over. His kid's about like 7, 8 to my studio, and suddenly the kid's like face lit up. He's like, "Oh my God, you have a book by Cameron Chaney?" Like he was a fan of Cameron Chaney's, which was so funny. And then I said, "Hey," his name was Noble. I'm like, "Noble, why don't you record a quick video and I'll send it to Cameron so he can say hi to you." So they connected, and also his little brother, and Cameron sent them some Goosebumps books.
Oh, wow. Perfect.
So
I used to love those.
It was so cool that we were able to make that connection, and it just made me realize what a wide reach BookTube has.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think people don't necessarily realize it as well. So it's funny you were talking about that. It's reminding me. So I'm pretty sure my girlfriend is Edward Lawn's biggest fan. So because he's got a book, he's got a book called Life After Dane that I picked up for obvious reasons, you know. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And one day she was staying over at my place and was just looking for a book to read, so she picked that up. She got hooked. She read the whole thing in one go. So now we're on our like 5th or 6th of E's books, just going through them slowly. Yeah. But it's funny because she says that he's a favorite author, and she's like, I've never read an author who can do like twists and things like he does. And it just I love the fact that it's like, he's good. I've read a couple as well, you know.
Yeah, I've read a couple of his books. He's very cool. He knows a lot about Stephen King too.
He does, yeah. He's kind of the. If I had a question about Stephen King, I would go to him for sure. He's like the scholar.
Yes, definitely.
You're listening to The Archer on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain. I'm here in conversation with author Regina Saint Claire, and this is Humans Can't Reboot with Emotional Warning. That was Emotional Warning by Humans Can't Reboot. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to be rejoined now in conversation by author Regina Saint Claire.
Cool. So going back to your zines, can you tell us what a zine is?
A zine is short for magazine, and it's something, I guess it would probably reached its heyday in the 80s, maybe earlier, 80s, 90s, but there were these homemade publications. I know when I was in college, there were a lot of zines that were made by the art students. They would just be cheaply printed. On those days, it would be like Xeroxed.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone, not Xerox, what am I talking about? Mimeograph, like purple mimeograph. In fact, when I started my zine, I thought, I got to get a mimeograph machine and do it right. And then I came to my senses. But, and there is just like that wonderful that homemade vibe is something I really missed, because so much of what we do and publish is digital and online. It's kind of like the appreciation for vinyl records. Zines, like old school zines to me are kind of like that. In fact, I went to StokerCon and I sold some zines, and then at the last day I just said, I'm just going to walk around and meet people and give them a zine. And I chatted with Brian Keene and gave him a zine, and he was like, oh, wow, this is great. I hope he wasn't just BSing me, but he seemed very sincere. So I'm hoping he read it, but he's like, I have a whole bunch of these zines in my basement. It's something that I think is fun. It's like a fun thing, and it's all through the mail. In fact, I'm only accepting submissions through the mail, which has cut down on it tremendously, because I do offer a pro rate for, in case you want to contribute something, Dane, fiction and essays. And when I put out the first announcement, I received 600 and something short stories, which was insane. So now it's only through the mail, and I do receive, I think I have about 10 that I'm looking at. So it's much more manageable, but it's fun.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I love that. And I like, because again, you mentioned how they have the kind of the handmade touch. And even with, indie books, self-published books, you don't really get that, because everyone just does it through Amazon KDP. So they do still all kind of have the same, I suppose, look and feel,
Yes.
And it reminds me, I suppose, like if you think of back in the day, poetry chapbooks, would you class that as like a kind of zine, or is it like a cousin to the zine? Because they tend to be pretty similar, handmade, rough and ready, cheap stuff that people can hand out,
Matt Wall does those. He does zines. In fact, he inspired me to do my zine with his Weird Mask zine, which I wrote, I think, one story for, maybe two. And he sent me a few, and I'm like, this is really cool. And he does also chapbooks. I don't really know the difference, but I did want to mention that I do work with a partner on my zine. His name's James Ippoliti, and he goes by Dr. J Demon Hunter on TikTok. He's got a great TikTok presence and has done some viral videos. But he does a lot of We also do a podcast called Bookworms Horror that you can find on any. Just to plug that, because I always forget to mention that. But we do a podcast, comes out about once a week, where we talk about writing and all that kind of stuff, creativity in general.
Cool. Well, and we've talked a lot about your different pursuits. I mean, we haven't even really touched on your art. How do you find the time to do everything, and how do you keep kind of everything straight in your head without just getting overwhelmed by ideas?
Oh, that's a good question. Overwhelmed. I get really overwhelmed by ideas. And sometimes I just want to stop doing the hard work and just go right to the fun part, which is usually writing the first draft.
Yeah.
Because like now I'm editing my novel, and I started this years ago. So a lot of what inspired me then, I'm just, not that connected with now. So but that's part of the process, is the discipline. I very much believe in finishing what you started, even if it's painful. and
Yeah.
clearing the decks and moving on. But I know you've written a lot of books, so I'm sure you can relate.
Yeah, no, I do exactly the same thing. So sometimes it's like pulling teeth, but it's like I've just got to finish this first draft. I don't even care if I don't edit it. I've just got to get this done.
Yes. And I think sometimes setting that date for yourself, like one thing that helped me finish my book, even though it turned out it was rejected in the end, but I put out someone was put, I think it was it Cemetery Dance? I don't know. Somebody was asking for novels, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to finish this thing and send it off. And it actually made a couple cuts before they said no. And it was pretty rough, but that forced me into finishing it. And I finished it in like a couple weeks.
Amazing.
So
do you have one of the questions I wanted to ask about your writing is like, do you have a writing routine?
I do have a writing routine. I try to do, I mean, depending on how much I have a part-time job, how much I have to do that. I try to work on it at least an hour or two every morning without fail. Like this morning I worked on it, and it's almost like exercising, just get it done. Get it done or first thing in the morning, and then it's done. I really enjoy doing that. I put on my Zen music and just sit back and edit. I like this morning I edited. I also worked on, I'm translating. No, that's not the right word.
Transcribing.
Transcribing my novel into a screenplay.
Okay, yeah.
Adaptation.
That's it. Yeah, I think, yeah.
Right, that's the word I was looking for. I'm doing an adaptation. So this morning I did a couple scenes on that, and that's pretty much like grunt work, but
yeah,
I want to get that done.
Yeah. Well, and again, like the idea of it being like working out, it's, you say it's grunt work, but it's grunt work that has to be done. It's like doing the housework, it's not fun. You got to do it anyway, And I think that's what people don't realize about writers is that I suppose it's the same with any other job or with any other, creative pursuit. There's always the boring stuff that you have to do as well,
Yes, I agree. I mean, even somebody who's a painter has to layer things and do certain things that maybe isn't inspiring, but it's part of the job.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Okay, just a couple more questions. One of them I wanted to ask, what do you think it is that attracts you to sort of horror and darker fiction?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't really know. I've always loved, I'm not into the really extreme horror. Let me just say, I don't like things that, and I'm not shaming anyone who's into it, but I'm more into Gothic. I've just always loved, I grew up in a very old house, and I live now in a very old house. I love storms. When people complain about the weather, I'm happy when it's raining, like that kind of, I think I just have a Gothic personality that's kind of inbred. And I've found that a lot of my fellow horror tubers are in the same way. And I think there might be a misconception that people who are into horror are like into violence, and that's farthest from the truth. So for me and for most of the people I've met, none of them, they're all like sensitive, nerdy people. For the most part. And I just think it's a thing. And maybe when we were kids, we got a thrill. Like I remember my first horror film was I was about 5, and there was an old early 60s horror movie on the TV, and we had a black and white TV, and it was Tarantula. And I remember the scene when they were trying to blow up the spider, and I just was like glued to the set. I couldn't get enough, and I don't know where that comes from, but I just loved it. Like it was a roller coaster ride. It scared me, but I wanted to experience it. Yeah,
exactly. It scared you, but as soon as it finished, you wanted to queue up and do it again.
Exactly.
Cool, awesome. Okay, so last question is kind of 2 in 1. So what have you got planned next, and where can people follow you to find out more?
Okay, well, my next novel, the next novel that's coming out probably in October is called Carney, and it's a carnival themed horror. It's kind of, I guess, a novella. It's about as my work doesn't tend to be very long. So at this point, it's about 62,000 words. And the best place to find me is probably on my YouTube channel. That's where I get the most traction. And then all my links are there. So it's Regina's Haunted Library on YouTube. And I have a Facebook page, and Instagram, but I'm basically pretty much stick to YouTube. I'm not on Twitter or anything like that, or
Yeah.
TikTok.
Big thank you to Regina Saint Claire for joining me. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and this is Tom Bradley Jr. with Loving You.
Broken memories, tiny tragedies, lead me back now to loving you. And every time I blink, hesitate to think why I'm still in love with you. 'Cause every time I look away, there's a price I have to pay. 'Cause you are the one I'm thinking about tomorrow, and I need a second chance for you to come and help me fall away beneath your shadow and let me fall in love with you now, honey. Looking at the sky, screaming, asking why everything happened the way it did. I'm still in love with you and swear my heart's still true. All I wanna do for you. So every time I look away, there's a price I have to pay. 'Cause you are the one I'm thinking about tomorrow, and I need a second chance for you to come and help me fall away beneath my shadow and help me fall in love with you, oh honey. So baby, come on now and kiss me. Every day I have since I'm in you. Been a bumpy road, but I know that you miss me. So every time I look away, there's a feeling I could stay. It's you. Tomorrow, and I need a second chance for you to come and help me fall away beneath the shadow and help me fall in love with you now, honey. You are the one I'm thinking about tomorrow, and I need a second chance for you to come and help me fall away beneath the shadow and help me fall in love with you. uncharted waters, with the wind against our backs. Just the two of us upon this ship, and the compass says we are on track. Whoa, there's no monsters here. Now we're off the map, we're free to sail forever. There's no monsters here. We've left them all behind, my dear. Behind, my dear. We don't know where we're going now, but we'll enjoy it anyway. We'll find out where we are somehow, then we'll be back someday. Whoa, there's no monsters here. Now we're off the map, we're free to sail forever. There's no monsters here. We've left them all behind, my dear. Whoa, there's no monsters here. Now we're off the map, we're free to sail forever. There's no monsters here. We've left them all behind, my dear. Behind, my dear. We've left them all behind. Yeah, we left them all behind. Now we left them all behind. Yeah, we left them all behind.
That was Map by Luna Barge, and before that we had Loving You by Tom Bradley Jr. You're listening to The Art Show on 106.6 FM Wickham Sound. I'm your host, Dane Cobain, and it's time for us to head over to the Ilkshed now to catch up with Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review.
Shapes of Things, the best of the Yardbirds. The Yardbirds are now best known for having had in their ranks three of the best known guitarists to come out of the 60s. Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page. The early tracks on this album are standard fare for the British blues boom. Clapton's guitar stands out, but it is the same kind of thing the Animals, the Stones and the Kinks were doing at the time. The Clapton lineup had a big hit with the song For Your Love, which sent them in a much more commercial direction that did not appeal to Clapton. So he left, going on to join John Mayall's Blues Breakers and then form Cream. Jeff Beck took over from Clapton, and though they were now having hit singles, they also started to get more creative. Beck was a pioneer of guitar effects and feedback. The first hit singles he played on, like Heart Full of Soul, had distorted riffs and psychedelic solos. They were leading the field back in the mid-60s with the groundbreaking single Shapes of Things. Beck made the guitar sound like a sitar for songs like Over, Under, Sideways, Down. They made serious comment songs like Mr. You're a Better Man Than I. Though the Yardbirds are best known for their guitarists, the singer and harmonica player Keith Relf deserves a mention. He looked like the perfect pop star, but he sung with a quite deep, almost menacing tone. I particularly like the song Still I'm Sad, where he croons over monk-like chanting. There was a brief period just before Beck left and just after Jimmy Page joined, when they performed with two lead guitars. A clip of this lineup appears in the film Blow Up. They also appear together on this album's last great track, Happening 10 Years' Time Ago. The Yardbirds continued with Jimmy Page but were never again so successful, though they tried to become even more commercial. Beck went on to have a hit single with Hi Ho Silver Lining and form his own band with Rod Stewart and Ron Wood. They made two albums that sounded a bit like Led Zeppelin, before Jimmy Page then formed Led Zeppelin and made an album that sounded a bit like the Jeff Beck Group. The best of the Yardbirds, Shapes of Things.
Big thank you to Twangling Jack Ford for this week's album review. Thank you to A.B. Frank for the Flash Fiction. Thank you to Regina Saint Claire for being this week's guest, as well as to everyone whose music I've shared. As always, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound, you should be able to find us. We are repeated on Wickham Sound on Monday nights. We're on the Wickham Sound Listen Again, iTunes, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. You can reach out to me here at the studio on dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. That's dane.cobain at wickhamsound.org.uk. And you can also find us on Facebook if you search for The Art Show on Wickham Sound. So that's it for another week. I'm going to love you and leave you. This is Rob Full Stop with Kinsakuro reimagined. I'll see you next week.
More smiles and weary eyes, water drop tears of joy. For the shining rays of light, the pretending glimmer in your eyes. Beautifully broken and painted with gold, the story that can never be told. To show who you are to me, to me. I just wanted you to know, I just wanted you to know. You're the spring in my step, you're my everything. Another stepping stone until you fade away. Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry for me. Breathe it in, let it out. Let it in like it used to be. Shining so brightly, and become another star in the sky. 'Cause it doesn't even matter anymore. Let's forget yesterday once more. Show who you are to me. Wanted you to know, I just wanted you to know. Spring in my step, you're my everything. Another stepping stone until you fade away. Don't cry, don't cry, don't cry for me. Don't slip away, forget what I can be. Spring on my step, you're my everything. Don't go away. I just wanted you to know, I just wanted you to know, wanted you to know. I just wanted you to know. I just wanted you to know.
Is resentful. Everything I touch turns to shit. I'd like to pretend I got a gun in my hand, but it's only a temporary fix. I wanna stay inside my house. Not much point in going out. People depression and mediocrity. I'm sure you're lovely people, and I guess I get the point. No one believes anxiety until they do believe in choice. Sometimes I choose to be lonely, sometimes I choose to be sane. If I was forced to relive my life, I wouldn't do much the same. I wanna stay inside my house. Not much point in going out. People no longer interest me. Depression